The dispatcher said 2 kids, a boy and a girl, showed up on a lady's doorstep. Lady said the kids wouldn't talk or give their names. She gave them milk and cookies and sent them to rest in her bed because they looked tired. No children had been reported missing, but it was late, so the dispatcher thought the parents probably didn't know their kids were gone. No problem. Not my first call about kids that walked out the front door because they wanted to play. At least it wasn't winter. I drove to the house on the outskirts of Bridal Veil Lake. It looked like another farm sold off for condos that were never built. A bunch of wild fields and dirt surrounded the lady's house. It was remote and dark, and I wondered if she felt comfortable living alone out here. That knock in the middle of the night must have been a shock. I announced my presence and knocked lightly. "Hello?" An old woman, the lady, answered. "Hello?" "Hello, how are you doing tonight, ma'am?" "Been better. They're in the bedroom, sleeping, I think." She stepped inside and let me in. I saw 2 shapes beneath a quilt in the darkened bedroom. "There was no one else? You didn't see anybody?" She shook her head. "Were they injured? Scared?" "No, just shy. Really shy." She nodded towards the kitchen, which I could see from where I stood, not being a big house. "They hardly ate." There were 2 neat piles of chocolate chip cookies beside full cups of milk. It all looked completely untouched. The sight made me antsy. She said they didn't eat much. They ate something, but not a crumb had fallen on the table. Nuh-uh, I have 3 kids of my own. I never saw them leave a cookie intact at all. Something really bad must have happened to those children. "Hey, kids," I said quietly from the doorway of the bedroom. I didn't want to startle them. "You awake?" No answer, but I had to check on them. There was only a lamp for the room, and it barely lit anything. 2 small shapes lay with their bodies and heads covered with the quilt, completely still. "I'm a policeman. I'm here to help you. You don't have to be scared." I waited, but still nothing. "I'm gonna pull off the blanket very slowly, just so you can see me, okay? Then you can put it right back if that makes you feel safe." Nothing. They didn't move a muscle. I prepared for the worst and pulled off the quilt. Their eyes were black, shiny, lifeless. Jesus! Because these were not living children, but full-size dolls, complete with clothes and realistic hair. Only the eyes and their plastic faces looked immediately fake. What the hell? I stomped out, admittedly pissed. The lady waited in her living room chair. "Is this a joke?" "Excuse me?" "Those aren't real kids. They're dolls," I said. She seemed confused. "I beg your pardon?" I took a breath and tried to calm myself. "Ma'am, are you on medication or—" "Jesus Christ, save us!" She got up and went to the bedroom. I shouldn't have let her see. The lady fainted at the foot of the bed. I called it in, and everybody had a good laugh about the dolls. Except for me. The lady had been prescribed blood thinners and a nasal spray for seasonal allergies. Unless she did other non-prescribed drugs, she had nothing hallucinogenic in her system. That meant she probably had a tumor or dementia or something. Gas leak could have also been a possibility. I mulled over those details while I escorted the ambulance to the hospital. She wasn't conscious for long, but didn't fight my suggestions to see a doctor. "Thank you," she said from the stretcher, squeezing my hand just before the paramedics wheeled her into the ER. I nodded. I didn't know what to say, but it was my job to help. I followed them in. Sometimes doctors want to ask questions. The cafeteria called to me. 4 more hours till the end of my shift. Coffee and a sandwich seemed prudent. I hardly touched them. The walkie crackled. There had been an assault at the hospital. Obviously, I responded. "Someone's been attacked," dispatch said. The nurse that called wasn't very clear, and she hung up. I got up from the table about the same time a doctor descended the steps into the food court and shouted something incomprehensible. When he got close, I grabbed him by the shoulders. "She's dead. Gone. He killed her," the doctor said. It took a bit for me to understand. I'll summarize. The old lady I'd escorted to the hospital had been murdered by another patient, a young man suffering from unmedicated schizophrenia. He'd been brought into the ER after being hit by a car. "I thought he was sleeping," the doc had told me. He sat on the floor with his head in his hands. "Oh God, her head. He damn near cut her head off." Apparently, he walked down the hallway with it. Then he sat down and chatted with staff until the police arrived. I never left the food court, so I was spared the scene. Still messed me up. She thanked me. I'd sent her to her grisly death. A tragedy. That's what everyone, including my therapist, said, and I eventually agreed. I believed it. For years, I didn't think about those dolls unless someone brought them up. The old woman had been suffering some kind of delusion. No point in finding out what exactly. Probably wasn't even possible. Then, I got another call. "What? What did you just say?" The dispatcher didn't know about the kids and the dolls. That was half a decade ago at this point. "Can you hear me?" "Yes. North side. Gentleman says 2 kids showed up on his doorstep. No missing children reported tonight." "A boy and a girl? The kids?" I asked. "Yeah, how'd you know?" I didn't explain. "I'm on it, but send more constables, please." So many similarities to the previous tragedy. The time of year, the wrong side of midnight, the kids gaining entry to the home. Except that hadn't happened last time. They were dolls, I reminded myself. I would have to go to the house in the posh side of town and find actual kids there. Then I'd do my job and get them home. Fear against resolve, I gripped the steering wheel too tight and my fingers went numb. Big, dead hot dog fingers trembled when I got out of the cruiser in the huge driveway. No lights were on in the mansion at the top of the hill. I'd hoped the other constables would have arrived, but I was alone again. It took me a few minutes to calm down and not call dispatch for an ETA. As I approached, I could see the front door had been left slightly open. My flashlight revealed a big foyer, enough to fit a house. Since there hadn't been a crime reported, I felt confident to call out to the owner. "Hello?" An echo replied. The place really was that big. "Bridal Veil Lake PD. Your front door's open, sir." I rang the doorbell and waited a bit, but nobody showed. I don't know why I didn't call dispatch or wait for another constable. The only reason I went in, I think, was because I had to know if history would repeat itself. "I'm coming in." Switches were dead. No power. The grand staircase wrapped the foyer in a broad embrace, and in the center, they were there, propped up beside a headless storyteller. At first I didn't understand, and I tried talking. "It's gonna be okay," I said to the headless man. He'd been posed with an oversized Grimm's fairy tale book between his thighs and arms. Before each of the black-eyed dolls, set up to appear as attentive children, a tall glass of milk and a bowl of chips had been placed and left untouched. I choked out a gasp, but it couldn't be. It couldn't be. How could the dolls be here? Attempts to draw my firearm and use my radio went about as well as you can imagine. The gun hit the marble floor and I communicated nothing of use to dispatch. Maybe that was good. I might have shot the other constables when they showed up. They found me on my knees and hysterical. I kept pointing at the dolls. They thought I meant the headless victim. "It's gonna be okay," one of them said, and it felt like I'd said it, or this constable had been cloned from my cells. Funny the places a shattered mind wonders. "Okay?" I asked. I don't remember much about that. I went to the hospital. They had to sedate me. I wouldn't stop talking about the dolls. Olive and Matthew, my therapist said. He'd come to visit and explained what had happened. It's a terrible coincidence, he said. Those dolls are the same, yes, from the last incident. Apparently, they didn't belong to the woman who passed. I don't know why this information horrified me. Well, who the hell do they belong to? I shouted. It's all right, he said. It's not entirely what you think. He really pissed me off. Look, just explain it then. The dolls weren't known to the relatives. They claimed the old lady who had been decapitated didn't like dolls of any kind. She found them creepy. Your colleagues put them into evidence for lack of a better option. Then they were sold at auction. And the rich guy bought them. No, but somebody did. And that person, well, they're the killer, I'm afraid. A man was discovered in the mansion basement, covered in blood, with the head of the owner. I thought you said it'd be all right. The man was mentally ill, but he bought those dolls. Maybe he even called about the kids. Do you see what I'm saying? Some kind of copycat killer? He shrugged, his bony shoulders in the tweed coat. It's the only thing that makes sense. Perhaps he knew the other schizophrenic man that killed the woman who thanked me. The important thing to note is that nothing supernatural is occurring. The therapist smiled. What? It's an unfortunate coincidence. I mean, that bullshit smile twitched. I've been around long enough to know when someone's pulling a con. I never thought it was supernatural. Why did you say that? I asked. He chuckled nervously. An unfortunate choice of words. I didn't mean to imply that. How do you know the names? The names? Of the dolls, I said, before attempting to get out of the hospital bed. Handcuffs held my wrists. The sedatives had prevented this observation until the urge to punch the therapist moved my body. What the hell is going on? Why are you telling me this? You're not from the department. What is happening? He backed away towards the door. Calm down. The killer named them. He kept saying the names over and over. The inspector contacted me. She thought it best I talk to you. I agreed, and bullshit. He suddenly went mute, his lips mouthing the words, "Help me," over and over. His eyes darted to the little window in the door at the same time a shadow passed across his face. The therapist shivered and sniffled back a tear. You should run, he said, his last words. All at once, the man collapsed. What the... Help! Help! I shouted. The nurse came in and did their thing, but he was gone. I asked him if he was gone. They stopped trying to revive him, one of them confirming his death. How had he died? A real tragedy, another unfortunate coincidence. The deceased therapist had an unknown aneurysm that just happened to trigger while he begged for help and a shadow crossed the window. It was all bullshit. I took his advice. After my wife picked me up from the hospital, I told her I'd taken early retirement. She looked relieved until I told her we needed to leave Bridal Veil Lake. I purchased a cottage up north on the Oxbow Lake. My family didn't come. Who could blame them? I didn't think they were in danger until I learned everybody is, and there are no safe places. They came on the third night. At first, the knocking struck too softly. I thought I'd imagined it. Then it became more persistent, more rapid. I didn't move from the recliner or even lower the footrest. I just watched the door and did my best not to breathe too loudly. The knocking continued with desperate urgency. Then tiny fingernails scratched at the door. Soft weeping followed that. A child for sure. I could no longer be idle. I went to the window and peeked through the curtain. The expected pair, Olive and Matthew, wept in the gloom on the stoop. They weren't dolls this time. They were kids, flesh and blood, and human. I relented and opened the door. The very image of the dolls looked up to me. Misery and fatigue had captured the innocence from their face. I know what an overtired child looks like. This wasn't that. The little boy and girl hadn't rested in days. They swayed on their feet, avoiding collapse by way of fear or something greater. I just didn't know that yet. I'm not crazy. I don't believe in ghosts or whatever this was supposed to be. I hadn't been drinking anything but pop, and there was no gas leak in the cottage or monoxide detectors would be going off. The kids were real, and they were scared. But so was I. I grabbed their arms and basically tossed them behind me and into the living room. It was dark on Oxbow Lake with a million places to hide. I shut the door and threw the bolt. Olive and Matthew clutched one another by the recliner. "What's going on? Who are you? How did you get here?" They stared, but not at me or anything. Both were underweight and filthy, a combination of urine and stale sweat emanating from their simple clothes. "Go to the couch and lie down," I said, completely aware of the pattern I was fulfilling. I went to the kitchen and grabbed some apples and cheese. I set it down on the coffee table. "Eat," I said. Neither would look at the food. "Eat," I said louder. They had to eat. It felt crucial. If they ate, then they were real, because the food would be gone, and it seemed like tangible proof of our existence. Olive yawned. Matthew's expression contorted with scorn, while his bottom lip trembled. He seemed angry with her. She looked ashamed. Both started to cry again. "What the hell happened to you?" I dialed 911 and went through the process of summoning the police. The dispatcher thought I was crazy when I demanded a severe response. "You'll be lucky to see a constable within an hour, sir," she said. "You're so far away." I couldn't argue with that, but I tried anyway. "I'll be dead before that. Something isn't right." I told her about the dolls and my time with the BVLP. She listened intently because that's what she was trained to do. Talking was good. Talking meant life and focus off of whatever she might believe I could be capable of. The call hadn't gone well, in other words. I'd simply cast myself as crazy, a possibly dangerous suspect. I hung up. Maybe they'd get here fast because of the kids. Maybe I'd be beheaded long before a hope of rescue. The kids leaned into the cushions, closed their eyes, and immediately fell asleep. No bites had been taken of the food. I got my gun from the bedroom. When I returned, the dolls were beside them. All 4 kids could be mistaken for sleeping children. A tall, disheveled man stood by the peeled screen of the open door. Only his fingernails, bitten and jagged, caught the edge of the lamplight. Shadowed lips muttered gibberish at first, but then his words became clear. "Dolls don't eat. Dolls don't eat. Dolls don't eat." I aimed. He lunged, and I fired. He staggered, but not before wrapping his large hand around the barrel of the gun. I put another bullet through him, yet he didn't fall. With surprising strength, he smacked me across the face, and I dropped the gun. He retrieved it, and somehow our positions in the living room were reversed. He stood near the couch. The real kids had run away. Only their simulacrums remained. I stood near the expertly sliced screen of the front door. The man's narrow head resembled a crescent moon. He appeared confused by the blood exiting his body as he struggled to level the gun. I wasn't about to wait around for him to figure it out. I leapt through the open window as a bullet shattered the glass above my head. My ass hit the dirt, and I tore off up the pitch of the forest, figuring I'd hide somewhere until the police arrived. For a while that worked. I lay in the midst of some thorny brush, scratching myself up good, until time enough said the man had to be dead from blood loss. I endured the escape from the brambles, crawling until something firm pressed between my shoulder blades. "There you are," said a voice, impossibly calm and smooth. "Don't move. I have you. The blade is sharp, and I've done this before." I did as he said and remained as still as my fear would allow. "Of course, you understand something about it now." When I remained silent, he ordered me to answer, punctuating the request with the tip of his knife. "You make them knock on the door in the night. They're supposed to be like dolls, and if they're not, then the kind caretakers have to die. Olive and Matthew must become the same as their dolls. Exactly the same." "Why?" The knife point penetrated slightly. "That's not for you to know. We're only here because of bad luck. You happened upon 2 instances of the training. They were so little that first time. They're older now, but they don't look it. We don't let them grow much." "You cut off that woman's head in the hospital," I accused. The knife pressure relaxed a little. "Perhaps I was wrong, and you don't get it." But then I did, and resumed tension forced me to reveal everything. "You didn't kill that woman. You didn't kill the rich guy. And you aren't going to kill me." The moon-faced guy had been a ringer for the murderer, just like the other 2. Where did he find so many mentally ill people to take the fall? He'd need access. He'd have to be a doctor of some kind. Or a therapist. "You're alive, so you didn't die in the hospital. No aneurysm. How's that possible?" The therapist laughed. "Elementary, my dear Watson. I made up a story for the nurses. Told them you were dangerous and obsessed with me. I needed to cut contact with you, and, while certainly dramatic, they were all too willing to help out a colleague. You wanted me to go far away. I hoped you would, but never thought you'd be so dense as to choose yet another perfectly isolated location for me to work. You would have been much safer in your home." I was too scared to feel stupid. "Now, we're going back to see Olive and Matthew. My poor slave is likely dead, so it's my turn to cut, and that's fine. I'm out of practice, and there's no need to rush." "Why let the victims contact the police?" "The children have to see that no one can help them. They're mine. Makes it more fun, too." "But why the dolls? You're leaving a trail." He snickered. "Less than breadcrumbs. Only you've connected 2 of the scenes, and I've left dozens over the years. Granted, the last one was dramatic. I couldn't help myself. I wanted Olive and Matthew to see what happened to good people when they disappoint me." I thought of Olive's yawn, and how hungry they must always be. One of them ate. The knife pierced my skin, and I gasped and writhed. "Dolls don't eat. Now get up, into the house," and the distant thrum of an engine filled the otherwise perfect quiet of the night. Noise travels easily across the water, so we waited and listened. When it became clear that a vehicle was approaching, he drew in a sharp breath and exhaled slowly, calming himself. "Well, someone's coming. It happens." "You gonna kill me?" The pressure of the knife tip evaporated like the presence of the psychotic therapist. I leapt to my feet and threw a wild punch into the dark. Nothing but air swept over my knuckles. "Coward. I won't keep quiet. I'm not afraid." I lied badly. "I'll find you. I'll find those kids. You hear me? I'm coming. Olive, Matthew." He chuckled, already some indeterminable distance away. "Good luck. Tell anyone you think will care, or will believe you." Headlights bounced down the narrow dirt road. The front door of the cottage opened and filled with the therapist. I screamed and rushed him and realized my next mistake too late. The man wasn't the therapist, but an off-duty park warden, keenly aware of his surroundings and the clumsy charge of an old wounded cop. He flipped me with some kind of judo. I landed across the coffee table on the untouched food, facing the black-eyed dolls. A pair of cuffs came next. I ranted about the dolls and the therapist and the children, but to no avail. They found the moon-faced martyr crouched by the broken window. Even dead, he still appeared confused. The warden used his cell to call for more support. The dispatcher had only called him because she knew he lived near Oxbow Lake. I told the story so many times and begged them to look for the therapist and those kids. Hours later, someone must have called him because they came back with another unfavorable fabrication. The therapist had never left Bridal Veil Lake and answered the call from Huntsville police on a landline at his office. He must have drove back, I said. But Huntsville and Oxbow Lake are roughly 5 hours away from Bridal Veil Lake. I'd been questioned for 6 hours. He also told us about your condition. I laughed. Sure, of course he did. But what about the break-ins and the dolls? The constables looked at one another. We asked about that. He says it's possible, perhaps even likely, given your trauma, that you took those dolls from evidence. That's where they were after your last discovery. You had access and a reason to dwell on them. A reason? They were choosing their words carefully. What about the intruder? He's a local, an addict, really ill. He's been arrested for breaking into cottages before. He usually does it to empty ones. You just moved to Oxbow. Even with lights on and the vehicle out front, he probably didn't understand it was occupied. You surprised him. I surprised him? I said incredulously. After more protests, I was released and told to be grateful. An investigation would follow, of course, but no charges laid unless something more incriminating was found. It won't be, I said bitterly. The constable walked me out of the Huntsville station, shaking his head and walking away. Man doesn't know how lucky he is. Before I could object, the door shut. I packed my stuff and raced home. I didn't have my gun, of course, but I figured he wouldn't be armed at his office. If he was, it'd be with a knife. In a fair fight, I'd take it and cut his damn head off. Ignoring the protests of his secretary and the man seated in the treatment room, I found him. He appeared alarmed, scared. What's the matter? What? Didn't expect to see me again? I moved closer to his desk and he stood up, backing away to the large window. We were on the 5th floor of the building. Where are they? Who? I braced my foot against the desk and pushed it slowly until his legs were trapped against the sill. Olive and Matthew. I don't, he yelped when I pushed harder. I swear, the police in Huntsville, they called. I understand something happened up there, but I can assure you, you died in the hospital right in front of me. He looked to the other man in the room, his patient. I didn't even visit you in the hospital. I'm clearly not dead. Your PTSD must have caused a psychotic break and... Liar! We argued more, but the BVLP showed up and I was strongly encouraged to leave, which I did. I refrained from telling him this isn't over, because then I'd be arrested. He already knew. He was counting on it. I went home next and tried to talk to my wife and family. He'd called them first and told them to be careful, told them to call the police if I started behaving erratically. My story, of course, fell into that category. You can't stay here, my wife said, and it hurt to know that she wouldn't believe me, and never could. I left without argument. He found me later in the park that night. The nervous demeanor had been left behind for his patients and the rest of the world. He lit a cigarette and asked if I wanted one. "You son of a bitch," I said. He exhaled a plume into the air. "So now you understand." "How I'm about to kill you? Sure. I had nothing to lose." "They're dead if I am," he said, completely calm. "Seems like I'd be doing them a favor." He pulled a small pistol out of his coat. "No one would be surprised if I carried this and shot a crazed attacker." "What do you want?" I had nothing left to give him anymore. "No one gets away. They have to know." "So, you gonna kill me?" "Eventually, yes. I will come and we'll finish what we started. They'll knock in the night and you'll answer the door, let them in, and offer them food." "Which they won't eat." He nodded. "Because they're dolls." "If they're not by then it'll be over. I'll find others, but I think they'll do fine." "Tell me why you're doing this. I'm as good as dead anyway." He held his cigarette in clenched teeth, and then he smiled. "You'd be shocked how much one will pay for a doll of mine. Quite shocked indeed." "That's not why you do this," I said. Not enough of me remained to shed a tear. I felt hollow, dead already. I couldn't be shocked anymore. When they knocked, I would open the door. I'd try to help them, though it seemed futile, and failure was almost assured. He backed away until confident that I wouldn't follow. I stayed in the park the rest of the night, but moved into the motel where I currently live the next day. Now I wait. I'm typing this out and putting it out there, so maybe when I'm gone, when I'm headless, someone will look for those poor kids and give them something to eat. That's my last low hope, at least. The house was a small, two-story affair, with white siding on the bottom floor and gray shingles on the top. 3 windows were facing the street, a large picture window, a small rectangular one above that, and another large window below it. I got out of my car and walked towards the door, knocking twice before it opened. A woman stood there, wearing a blue dress with her hair tied back in a bun. She had bright green eyes that seemed to sparkle when she saw me standing outside her house. "Hello," she said cheerfully. Her voice was soft, but carried well through the night air. "Hi, are you Miss Tanner?" She nodded. "Yes, I am." She smiled again and stepped aside so I could enter the house. It smelled odd inside. Not bad or anything like that, just strange, like old books and dust. "Please come in." I entered her living room. It wasn't much more than a couch and a coffee table, an end table with a lamp on it. That's all I really needed for a place to sleep. The walls were painted yellow, which looked nice against the dark furniture. The carpet was black and covered most of the hardwood floors. There was a small kitchen off to the side of the living room with a sink, a stove, and a fridge. Everything was clean and tidy. "Sorry for the mess," she said, while pointing to some boxes stacked in the corner. "My husband died last year, and I just haven't had the time to get around to moving everything yet." "No problem. I don't mind sleeping in a bit of mess." She chuckled. "Well, if you want to put your things away, feel free. Just make sure not to take too long, since I have to leave in a few hours." "Okay, thank you." "You're welcome. I'll be right back." She disappeared down a hallway. As I looked around the room, I noticed something else odd about the house. The walls weren't straight. They bulged outward here and there like they'd been pushed from the inside out by someone, pushing their way through them. It was subtle enough that it didn't bother me at first, but as I looked closer, I realized that it wasn't just the walls. Every single surface in the entire house had these little imperfections, including the ceiling and the floor. I heard footsteps coming down the hall and turned to see Miss Tanner returning with 2 glasses filled with water. She handed me one and took a seat on the couch across from me. "So, what brings you out this way?" she asked as she sipped her drink. "I'm looking for a friend of mine. He went missing in the area about a month ago." "Oh, that's dreadful. What happened?" "He just vanished." I paused as I thought about how to explain. "He was staying in an abandoned hotel nearby and never came back. We think he might have gotten lost in the woods." She shook her head sadly. "That's awful. Is there any chance he survived? Maybe ran away somewhere?" "I don't know. I hope so." She sighed heavily and leaned back on the couch. "I'm sorry. I wish I could help you find him." We sat quietly for a few moments before she spoke up again. "I don't mean to pry, but are you sure he isn't still alive? Maybe he's hiding somewhere or something." "Well, maybe," I said hesitantly. "Do you have any idea where he might have gone?" "I'm not sure, but I have a hunch." She laughed softly and shook her head. "Well, let me know if you hear anything about him. I'll keep my ears open as well." "Thanks. I better get some sleep now," I said, standing up from the couch. "Of course. I'll show you to your room." I downed the glass of water and placed it on the table. Even that seemed crooked. "Thanks again for letting me stay here." "You're more than welcome. Please feel free to use anything in the kitchen if you need anything." "I will." I followed her down the hallway to a staircase leading to the second floor. At the top of those stairs was another hallway that led to 3 doors, one on each side and one at the end. She pointed to the door on the left. "That one's yours. No one else is staying this weekend, so other doors will be locked." She opened the door to my room and flicked a light switch. There was a dresser opposite the bed with a window above it, and a small bed with a nightstand next to it. The wall behind the bed was covered in posters of famous horror movies, slasher flicks mostly. "This should be all set up for you." She motioned towards the bed. "Make yourself comfortable. My room is on the 3rd floor if you need anything." "Thank you. I'll keep that in mind." She walked over to the door at the end of the hall and closed it behind her before disappearing into her own room. I took a look around my room before lying down on the bed. The sheets were clean and smelled nice, but I couldn't tell whether they'd been washed recently or not. As I got under them, I noticed something strange about them. They felt heavy, like they were weighted down on one side. When I tried to lift them up, they wouldn't budge. I rolled over on my back and pulled at them, but still no give. Something was definitely wrong with this place. I lay there staring at the ceiling for a while before drifting off into a deep but restless sleep. I woke up sometime later to a knocking on the other side of my door. I sat up and rubbed my eyes before standing up from the bed. "Who is it?" I called out, walking over the door. There was no answer. I unlocked the door and cracked it open. It was dark outside, but the moon was bright enough that I could see everything clearly. I stepped out into the hallway and saw nothing except darkness. "Hello?" I called again, but once again there was no response. "Is someone there?" I asked as I turned around slowly. I heard another knock from behind me, and spun around only to catch sight of Miss Tanner standing in the doorway to her room. Her hair had fallen loose from her bun and hung down past her shoulders. She was wearing a white tank top and blue pajama pants with red stripes down them. She looked like she was trying to hide herself by covering her face with her hands, which were pressed against her cheeks. "Miss Tanner?" She didn't say anything, continuing to stare at me with wide eyes. "Are you okay?" I asked as I approached her. She nodded, but kept her head down. What's happened?" I asked as I reached out to touch her shoulder. She flinched away from my hand and backed up until she hit the wall behind her. Then, without saying a word, she ran down the hallway and disappeared into the shadows. I stood there for several seconds, dumbfounded by what had happened. What the hell had I just witnessed? Was it real? Or was it just one of those dreams or hallucinations brought on by stress or exhaustion? I went back inside my room and locked the door behind me. I grabbed my phone from my pocket and checked the time. It was after midnight. I'd been asleep for hours. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the poster of Friday the 13th hanging on the wall above the desk. Why would Miss Tanner act like that? And why would she try to hide from me when I touched her? It made no sense. I sighed heavily and laid back down on the bed. I wanted to go back to sleep, but I knew I couldn't fall asleep now. Not until I figured out what was going on here. Maybe if I waited long enough, she'd come back out and explain herself. I must have fallen asleep eventually, because suddenly I was shaken awake by someone pounding on the door. "Wake up!" I jumped up from the bed and opened the door to find Miss Tanner standing in front of me, with her hands balled into fists at her side. "What's wrong?" "Get dressed. You have to leave right now," she said frantically as she began to pace back and forth. "Why?" "You don't know how dangerous this place is. Get your things and get out, now." "What are you talking about?" She stopped pacing and looked me dead in the eye. "The house is cursed." "What?" "It's haunted. There are spirits in this house." I laughed nervously and shook my head. "There aren't any ghosts here." "Then what do you call that thing you saw earlier tonight?" "I don't know what you're talking about," I lied. Was she talking about herself? "I'm not leaving until I get some answers." "Please, just go. If you stay here much longer, something bad will happen to you, just like your friend." "My friend?" "Just go," she yelled. She started running downstairs. "Wait," I shouted after her, but it was too late. She was already halfway up the steps before she turned around and glared at me. "Tell me what happened." "He died," she said simply. "How?" "They got him." "Who?" "The monsters." I blinked at her and tried to process what she was telling me. "Monsters?" "Yes, the monsters. They came through the walls and they took him away." "Are you insane?" I screamed at her. "There's no such thing as ghosts or monsters." She frowned at me and shook her head. "There are more things than just that." Then she pointed to the floor below us. "You need to leave right now before they come for you next." "I can't leave. My friend might be here somewhere. He could still be alive." She let out a frustrated sigh and walked over to the window. She pushed aside the curtains and looked outside. The moon was bright enough that I could see everything clearly. I followed her gaze out the window and saw nothing except for darkness. She pulled open the window and leaned out into the night air. "He's leaving," she called out into the darkness. I heard a low growl coming from what sounded like inside the walls. Miss Tanner slowly backed away from the window. Then, without warning, she fell backwards onto the ground. Her body hit the floor with a sickening crunch and didn't move again. I stood there, staring at Miss Tanner's broken form lying on the floor for several seconds, before turning around and sprinting down the stairs. The whole house began to creak and moan, and it appeared as if the walls were closing in on me. I ran past the kitchen and the living room, both of which appeared to be untouched, and headed towards the front door. The only light came from the moon shining through the windows of the hallway. As I approached the exit, I felt something grab hold of my shoulder and pull me back. I spun around quickly to see a figure standing in the shadows behind me. It was tall and thin, with oily skin and long black hair. Its face was covered by a mask made of human bones. I struggled against its grip, but couldn't break free. The walls looked as if they were melting, and more human bone-masked faces were emerging from all around me, surrounding me on all sides and closing in on me until I couldn't breathe. I reached out to touch one of them, but only grabbed hold of empty air. Then suddenly, I was dragged back through the walls, felt myself descending into that pitch-black abyss beneath me. I woke up gasping for breath and sat right up in bed. My heart was racing and my body was soaked with sweat. There was a loud bang on the door and I jumped out of bed. I unlocked the door and opened it slightly, just enough to see who was knocking. But when I did, I wasn't surprised to see Mrs. Tanner standing there with her hands balled into fists at her side. "Get dressed. You have to leave right now." Little is known about my grandpa, which is strange, but it's not like he's ever been a person of interest. All that we knew was that he was in the Army. After that, he suffered from PTSD and died under mysterious conditions. The end. It was December 2017. Nathan and I were home decorating for Christmas. Mom was out on a shopping spree. We were jerking around when Des showed up, a longtime friend of mine. With the three of us in the house, something was bound to happen. Nathan decided to go call his girlfriend, Anne. They'd been going out a couple of days now. "Dude, who's this?" Des pointed to the urn that was situated under the tree. "That's Grandpa. You can touch him. I know you're into freaky stuff." But it was already too late. His hands were all over the thing. Des had already opened the urn. Looks like drugs. What do you think would happen if I snorted some of it? Think you'll get high or just dead? He took a handful out of the urn. I inched closer to try and take it away from him. "Dude, come on. I don't think you'd get high." "Probably not." He raised an eyebrow and smirked. I knew that look. We'd been friends for over a decade, and I could tell when he had a messed up idea. He was an idiot. Maybe so was I. That's when we got along. Plan was simple. Get Nathan to snort the grandpa ashes and get first-hand experience of what would happen. Chances are, nothing would happen. I got the camera ready while Des planted some ash residue on the top lip and nostril to act like he'd already snorted some. With the ash residue on his nose, it was go time. Knowing my little brother, he'd be too innocent and too easy to fool. "What are you guys up to?" he asked when he saw Des wiping his nose and howling. "Whew! Now that you're done taking care of business, my boy, how about some of this?" Des grabbed him by the neck, leading him to the table where lines of something were spread out. "I don't know, man. I don't think he can handle it," I said, looking at Nathan as I gaslighted him to get a reaction. See, the thing is, if he'd known me better, he would have seen right through me. I don't even let him smoke weed with us. Why would I let him have any of whatever this was? I saw him bite down. I can. Beating his chest, trying to boost his bravado, he lowered his head, taking a deep breath and snorting the whole line. Des and I both burst out laughing. Nathan was confused for a while. Then he went stiff, his body starting to convulse. He fell to the ground, rolling and blinking rapidly. "What's happening? What's going on?" Des shoved me to the side and tried to steady him. "Get some water," he told me. I came back with a glass of water and he downed it. "What the hell, bro?" He looked at me. "What? I was thirsty." Then he proceeded to slap Nathan. "Wake up! Wake up!" Nathan continued to jerk his body. Then he went limp. There was a deafening silence in the room. Beads of sweat dribbled down my face. I splashed him with water and he woke up. What'd you guys do?" he yelled at us. We told him what had happened. We couldn't keep a straight face. We laughed about it. Then Nathan started wearing more than one jacket. He claimed he was cold. We shrugged it off. He'd come and snuggle with Mom during movies. "Mom's warm," he said, and eventually fell asleep. It was weird. The dude was 17. Still, I was getting an uneasy feeling that I kept shutting off. At times, he'd complain about how his girl, Anne, was not giving him much warmth. I assumed he was talking about sex or something and getting his blood going. How little I knew. Nathan stopped going out, and Anne stopped calling. He had quieted down about being cold. Around midnight, I'd catch him in front of Mom's room, snuggling something like a blanket. Every time I'd knock on his door, he'd come rushing out. "Everything okay, bud? What's up with Anne? Y'all break up?" He'd just act like everything was okay. Then one day, while we were watching a movie, Des leaned over and told me, "Dude, I heard from Cass's boyfriend Diego, who went with Brian to the theater, about how Matt's cousin, you know, his brother's a little slow. He heard Kelly say, 'Anne's missing.' I don't know, dude. It's kind of weird." That was news to me. Nathan told me that everything was fine, and he had just spoken to Anne. I think he's lying. We need to check out his room. Des looked at me like I was high. He sized me up from head to toe. I mean, I was high, but he was making it a little obvious. I'm not about to go in your brother's room and check out his weird collection of who knows what. Hey, what are you doing? Let go. Nathan had fallen asleep, snuggled up with our mom on the couch like he did sometimes, and I wasn't about to waste the opportunity. A strong stench wafted from Nathan's room as we approached. We had to cover our noses. That's nasty, man. Does he crap the bed or something? Ugh. I turned around, looking for something out of place. Des had pulled his blanket and found the source of the smell. There was what appeared to be skin, neatly laid there. Parts of it were jagged. It was signs that whoever had skinned the person was an amateur. What are you guys doing? We both spun around and found Nathan standing there, eyes hollow and devoid of emotions or recognition. He tilted his head to the side. Oh, I see you found Anne's blanket. She was saying I was getting under her skin, so I got under her skin all right. See, Tate, I've been feeling chilly for a while now, but Mom's home, and Anne's skin helps me sleep better at night. There's 2 more fabrics to that skin blanket, though. He took a few strides towards us, snuggling the thing, bloodshot eyes watching us. You killed Anne and took her skin? What, are you sick? The whole scene made my head hurt, realization dawning on me. He was possessed. He had to be. You're messed up, man. Like, really messed up. Des pulled the skin by the corner. There were bloodstains and bruises. The thing was flappy. He scrunched his nose. He's capable of that. What else is he capable of? He killed Anne and skinned her. That's just sick, man. Nathan giggled. Nuh-uh. Anne's alive. I love her. So I didn't kill her. She killed herself to keep me warm. After the whole ordeal with the powder, I was feeling cold, you know? My heart sank, blame crashing into me. We did this. We did. We need to fix it. We need to fix you. I moved closer, each step heavier than the last, heart hammering in my chest. My breath was strained, and I went in for a hug. We? Des asked, while trying to get the cogs in his head working. What you mean, we? Nuh-uh, brah. I watched Nathan get in bed and pull Anne's skin over his body as he let out a deep sigh. Close the door on your way out, he said, pulling it tightly around his body, almost snuggling it. He was smiling. Look, you might be wondering why we were so calm about all this. Some of it was the weed, but some of it was us realizing we couldn't tell anybody, because we had done this. Dez's place was the best place to think without Nathan eavesdropping. We didn't want to make him suspect us. When our heads were cleared, we yelled and kicked things and cussed at our stupidity. So your grandpa possessed your brother, and now he's doing his bidding. Your brother's a crybaby. This can't be him. Des was going up and down, biting his nails. And dead people are cold, meaning that's why he's feeling cold, and he only finds warmth in those he loves, like your mom. I fumbled for my phone and dialed her number. It went to voicemail. I tried it, and it went straight to voicemail again. Des told me to put my phone on record because he had a weird feeling. We needed to do something, but without a solid plan, things could get out of hand. That's how we did things, though. Act now and think later. Des was quick to Google some exorcist stuff and phrases. We got holy water, salt, and crosses, and we ran like hell back to my place. The lights were off, which was strange. We tried our best to sneak in and turn the lights on. Nathan was sitting on the couch, his skin blanket wrapped around him. The whole room reeked of decay, but he seemed to be asleep. Slowly as possible, we made our way towards him. Just as we came to within arm's reach, he woke up. His eyes were blood red, and he went feral. He jumped up, gnashing his teeth and fingernails in my face. He was clawing with that thing dangling off his shoulder like a cape. Dez yanked him by the skin blanket, trying to get him off of me. Oh my God, it's so slippery. It stinks. Nathan turned around and headbutted him, and he fell with his nose bleeding. I splashed him with the holy water, and he shrieked, retreating to the corner. His voice went deep. Son, don't. It's Grandpa Max. I'm so cold. I splashed him some more, and he whimpered, demurring as his demeanor changed. Tate, what's happening? What are you doing? It was my brother's voice, his eyes pleading. Please, help me. I'm so cold. Everything around me became muffled. I looked at what I was doing, then back to the person before me. I'm sorry. Dez pushed me to the side and threw salt on him, yelling, Exi ergo transgressor, exi ergo transgressor, exi subtutor plene omne dolo et fabulace. Vertitus immiscique innocentium persuator. Nathan growled through gritted teeth as Dez went on speaking that faux Latin. A cacophony of words rained down on us. His eyes rolled to the back of his head. Lights began to flicker. He grunted like a feral animal as drool dribbled down his chin. Ni vecigu la lordum de la absimo. Nathan's body twisted and jerked. He cocked his head to the side and ground his teeth. We kept throwing salt and holy water on him, Dez reciting his phrases. There was yelling back and forth in a deep, rumbling voice as Dez went on. Then everything went silent. Nathan fell to the ground, limp. Is it over? Is it done? I didn't respond, but I dashed to my brother's side. I hugged him tight, and as I held him, he seemed to come back to himself some. What happened? Why am I wet and on the floor? When we told him about what had happened, he sobbed and threw away the skin blanket. His eyes looked droopy, the bags under them showing that he hadn't been sleeping much. A week later, Anne's case was closed. I went to a public phone to give the police an anonymous tip, and that was the last we heard of it. When my phone rang, I looked down and saw it was Dez. Sup? I asked. He took a deep breath. This feels way too easy, don't you think? I mean, how it all went down. He waited for my response, and when he got none, he continued. See, right now, I'm in Nathan's room. Remember when we asked what happened, and he said he didn't recall anything? But then I asked if he knew any Latin prior to speaking it. You know, that stuff he was yelling back at us. He said it wasn't Latin. It was Spanish. I rolled my eyes. What are you getting at? Cogs in my brain starting to grind and sync. Dez paused, but continued with a deep sigh. That's the thing. My incantation was in Latin. He was responding in Spanish, meaning he remembers. I know he says he doesn't remember, but what if he's lying? What if he was never possessed? What if... The line went dead after that, the beating of my heart echoing through my eardrums. My hands were slippery with sweat. I had trouble dialing his number. I tried calling Dez back, but his phone never went through. I received 3 documents on my phone from him, and that was the end of it. The emergency alert on my phone went off with a shrill noise, repeating 3 times and vibrating angrily, just as I was bringing the last of my stuff into the cabin. I took the device out of my pocket and stared at it in disbelief for about a minute before realizing that I'd have to leave, only moments after arriving. My hands were shaking from the cold as I read through it again. Severe weather alert. Heavy snowfall in the Frontenac region is expected to begin tomorrow. 60 to 80 centimeters of precipitation. Not good. I realized the roads would be impassable by this time, the following day. That meant I would have to leave early the next morning to avoid being stuck on the road in the blizzard, but subsequently meant zero ice fishing time for me. I'd be lucky to make it home before it started coming down in earnest. Moments later, messages started coming in from my 3 friends who had planned to join me. The group chat notification popped up on my phone as I opened it. Matt, did you see the emergency alert about the storm? I guess the trip's off. What a bunch of crap. Ted, OMFG, a generational storm is what they're calling it now. Looks like we'll have to postpone it a few weeks. I hope you didn't go through with your plan to go up a day early, Jay. Greg, no kidding. What are the chances this blizzard hits on our ice fishing weekend? I messaged back saying I understood we'd have to reschedule. I told them that I made the trip up alone, accompanying the message with forehead-slapping emojis. It sucks that I'll be stuck up here alone, I thought to myself. My dog Gibson pawed at my leg, and I smiled at her, feeling slightly reassured by her presence. Yeah, you're right, Gibby. I'm not completely alone. At least I've got you here with me. After putting down a bowl of water and another containing kibble, my next priority was to start a fire in the small brick stove at the center of the main living area. There was wood stacked up in a neat pile next to it, and a small bag containing kindling, which we'd brought with us in the summer and left behind. At first glance, it looked like a large enough stack, but I knew from experience I'd need twice as much as it appeared to make to get through the night, so I went outside to gather more from beneath the boathouse. The family cottage was a rustic one, to put it mildly. There's no running water, no electricity, and the cabin's poorly insulated. Perennially procrastinated repairs were needed in more than one place, including the floor beneath one bed which had partially collapsed, letting in slight trickles of cold air from outside. It was drafty, and I could hear the sound of mice, which had made their way through the gaps, burrowing in the bedroom and finding their way into our old coats or sleeping bags or something that we'd left behind. I sighed as I lit the kerosene lamps, which were scattered on wobbly tables around the main living area. There was something about having vermin in the cottage that set me on edge, but at least Gibson's presence would keep them at a distance. After filling the place with warm, flickering light from a half-dozen kerosene lamps, I felt a little better. There was reassurance in having fire, and I started working on making a big one in the stove that would keep me warm throughout the night. I loosely wadded up some newspaper and then stacked dry kindling on top, making a teepee. Over that, I added larger pieces of wood, until I had piled it to the ceiling of the small stove. Then I lit a strip of cardboard and held it up to the paper inside, catching it alight in several places, watching as it began to burn and then flared up in a bright white-orange glow. Holding my hands up to the fire, I watched it and warmed myself up. Eventually I took off my boots and my coat, the entire cottage getting a little toasty. There's no sense unpacking, I thought, taking a beer out of the cooler and opening it. I took a sip and couldn't help but grimace at the taste. I'd never tried the brand before, and I picked it up on recommendation. It was awful, and lukewarm to boot. Par for the course, considering the trip so far. Took out my phone and watched some Netflix while beer went flat beside me. I lifted Gibson up onto the futon with me so that she was off the floor and close to the fire where it was warm. Eventually I got bored of Office reruns and called it a night, adding another log to the fire and reminding myself to wake up in an hour to keep it going. Pulling the futon even closer to the stove so that it was close to the fire as safety would allow, I curled up in my sleeping bag and drifted off into an uncomfortable slumber, constantly tossing and turning, trying to stay warm but not really succeeding. I woke up to the sound of whining coming from Gibson's trembling form on the bed beside me. I was so cold that I was actually scared. My teeth were chattering uncontrollably, and I realized a few hours had passed. The fire had gone out completely, reduced to mere embers at the base of the stove. I put on my jacket and blew hot breath onto my fingers, pulling Gibson closer to me. She was shaking as well. My hands were trembling as I put more newspaper and kindling on the fire, blowing it into embers and hoping they would reignite. My lungs felt frozen, and my heart was beating fast, my skin prickling with pins and needles, turning it into a total numbness in my extremities. I'd never felt so cold in my life. I realized I was far beyond the weather forecast for tomorrow. It seemed like it was minus 30 degrees and steadily dropping further. Terrified that I wouldn't be able to get my body temperature back up, my mind started racing, thinking of worst-case scenarios. If I couldn't stop shaking pretty soon, it would be impossible to start the fire again. I recalled that my truck was just outside, and I could get in there and start it up, turning on the heat until I felt warm again. The idea of getting out there and the truck refusing to start was too much to take, though. Considering the state of the beat-up old Ford, that seemed like a distinct possibility. So I continued stoking the fire, blowing on the precious few embers and adding more newspaper every so often until the tiny flame had begun to grow. I held my shaking hands up to the measly fire and added pieces of kindling sparingly, one by one, terrified of it going out again. Pulling Gibson closer, we shared each other's warmth, and I began to feel halfway human again. A sound came from outside the cabin suddenly, startling me and causing me to jump. My heart skipped a beat, then pounded faster and faster in my chest. A noise like fingernails being dragged along the siding could be heard from all around. Echoing in the small space, something was going from one end of the cottage to the other, attempting to get inside. Deep, guttural breathing could be heard, grunting and snorting, desperate as it scraped its talons along the boarded-up windows. Gibson began to whine, making high-pitched noises as she huddled closer to me, and I put my hands over her muzzle, muffling her sound. Was it a bear, I wondered? I realized I was holding my breath. I thought about the holes in the flimsy facade of the cabin, the spot beneath the bed where mice were getting in. I thought about the broken screen door and the wooden one behind that which needed to be replaced, almost falling off its rusty hinges. The entire cottage felt so frail and insecure all of a sudden, and I heard the loud noise of whatever that thing was, breathing heavily just outside, trying to get in. Maybe it was too cold out there even for it. The ground shook from the weight of the creature as it made its way around the cabin. I was so focused on it that I didn't notice the fire going out at first as it fizzled down to embers. I continued holding my breath until it was gone. Then I relit the fire, my shaking hands barely able to get it going again. Once it was burning hot, I didn't sleep anymore. I pulled Gibson close, and the two of us stayed up all night, watching the fire with wary eyes, taking occasional glances at the door. Even once we were both warm, we continued to shiver. When the sun came up, I didn't notice at first. It was dark in the cottage one minute, and then it was light. I blinked my eyes a few times and rolled out of bed, deciding I would waste no more time leaving. I was hoping the bear, or whatever had been outside the night before, was gone. Gibson was scratching at the front door, asking to be let outside to pee, which told me it was probably safe. In the light of the morning, all that had happened seemed to be a bad nightmare, and I told myself maybe it had been, till I got outside and saw the claw marks that marked the exterior wall. Shuddering, I threw my belongings in the truck, doused the fire with too much water, and took one last look at the place. What a weekend this had turned out to be, I thought to myself. With more people around, it would be easier to keep the fire going, taking turns feeding it with wood so that everyone could sleep through the night. But it was frightening being up here by myself, even with Gibson by my side. I'd never done it before in the winter, and I never would again. There were too many things that could go wrong. Freak snowstorm, a fallen tree blocking the road, getting stuck or going into a ditch, and those were just the beginning. I wanted to get out of here before any of those things happened. The truck didn't want to start at first. I turned the key in the ignition twice, hearing only the click of the absence of any engine noise. Cursing loudly, I checked to make sure I hadn't left the interior lights on or something which would drain the battery. Satisfied there was still a charge, I tried one more time, and finally the old shitbox let out a cough and kicked into life. The engine began to sputter before finally settling into a steady, rusted purr. "All right, Gibson, let's get out of here," I said. rubbing my dog's head and smiling as she blinked at me. She looked content in the front seat, happy to be back in the truck and out of the cold cottage. There was a thin layer of snow on the gravel road, and the tires moved easily enough. I looked up to see the sky was turning gray above us. A few snowflakes were just beginning to fall. The weather was making an early appearance. I turned on the radio, and sure enough, they said the same thing I was thinking. The storm would be arriving early. By noon, the highways would be a parking lot. Whiteout conditions. Be prepared to be trapped in your car. Have emergency services ready. My anxiety was through the roof as I went around a bend in the road. Hitting the gas, I came to the first big hill and went over it, seeing something strange up ahead as I came over the rise. Whatever it was blocking the road. Massive. Brown. The lumpy fur shape got bigger as I pulled up in front of it. The bear, which had been trying to get into my cottage the night before, was dead, lying in the middle of the gravel road and blocking it completely. First, I thought it had frozen to death. I got out of my truck and inspected it and was surprised to find there was a horrible smell coming from the carcass. It was a chemical smell, noxious and unpleasant, like some sort of factory waste. The snow had melted all around the beast, the blood and entrails pooling around the far side. What the hell could have done something like this? Aren't bears at the top of the food chain? Alpha predators? Gibson was by my side, but she didn't venture anywhere near the body. Usually she would have gotten curious, trying to sniff at it or something like that, but she stayed next to me, emitting a low growl. The road was completely blocked, I realized. There was no way out, not unless I could move it. No matter which way I attempted it, the giant body of the dead bear would not budge. It weighed a ton. There were large trees on either side of the road, so close to the driving path. There was only one way out, which was by driving across the frozen lake, and that was way risky. I hadn't been able to test the thickness of the ice yet. It would need to be nearly a foot deep for me to feel comfortable, but there was a clear way on and off the ice if it came down to it. I got back in the truck and threw it in reverse since there was nowhere to turn around. I felt sick to my stomach, nervous with anticipation and fear, uncertain of how things were going to play out. Once back in front of the cottage, I got out of the truck and went down to the ice with my spud. Walking out onto the lake, I cleared a spot with my boot and began to dig. I dug with the sharpened metal rod. Satisfied that I'd found the bottom of the ice, I put the tape measure through the hole, hoping it would be close to a foot. Looking at the tape measure, my heart sank. The ice was barely 7 inches thick, just below the minimum 8 inches where it would be safe to drive a vehicle across. My truck was on the heavy side, and I wouldn't feel comfortable unless it was a full foot thick. I pulled out my phone and checked for a signal, deciding it was time to call someone for help. Who would I call? I wasn't sure, but I knew I couldn't get out of this jam by myself. Of course, I muttered out loud, seeing the signal bars were down to 0, and the words "no service" were printed over the top of the screen. Surely I would have gotten another severe warning alert otherwise, because snow was now being dumped down on me from above, and the sky had turned nearly black with the approaching storm. I typed out a message in the group chat, telling them my situation, hitting send regardless of the lack of signal. I knew from experience that it would go through eventually. I just hoped it would be sooner rather than later. Gibson let out a loud, high-pitched whine, her tone rising in volume as she began to bark. High, persistent yips that were totally unlike her. She backed away, then let out a stream of urine, her hind legs trembling as she did. I looked up from my phone and saw what she had spotted. Across the lake, something was moving in the trees. I saw fingers wrapping around a tree trunk, too high up, the nails too long and too sharp to be a person. Whatever this giant was, it looked similar to a man, but it was massive. It peered out at me from beneath the boughs of the trees, its head probably 15 feet off the ground. Its skeletal limbs matched the monochromatic tone of the birches on either side of it, a gray, pale white shade. I couldn't distinguish the entire form of it in the shadows, but I could make out its eyes. They reflected back at me, catching the gray light coming through the clouds. And then I saw its mouth spread wider in a grin, teeth dripping blood, and it disappeared back into the darkness. The temperature felt like it had dropped to 30 below again, and I began to shiver involuntarily as I looked down to see Gibson doing the same. There was only one choice, only one place we could go. Back to the cabin. It was either that or risk plunging the truck into the frozen lake, attempting to drive across. We were on a small peninsula surrounded by water on all sides. Only one way in and one way out, and that way was blocked by the body of a giant brown bear. I took the dog back inside the cottage and locked the doors, taking uneasy glances outside through the cracks in the boarded-up windows. What the hell was that thing in the forest, I asked myself over and over again, but no answers came to mind. There were no creatures I could think of that were 15 feet tall, with reflective eyes that stood on two legs like a man, capable of disemboweling a full-grown brown bear, capable of causing the temperature to plunge all around me. There was only one creature capable of that, and it wasn't supposed to exist. It was something from myth, from folklore, from legends that weren't supposed to be real. "It's a Wendigo," I said out loud, immediately regretting the words, as if saying them made them true, as if saying them would summon it. Wendigos are supernatural creatures born of Canadian First Nation folklore. They live in cold, remote places and make people go mad merely through their presence. They thrive on hunger, despair, and loneliness of their victims, who usually live in remote communities. They drive families apart, instilling urges of cannibalism in people and making them want to consume their loved ones. During the lean, hard months of the winter, this usually happens. They turn people into raving cannibals, driving away all their loved ones, and then once they're alone, the Wendigo strikes. It either consumes you while you're still alive, tearing flesh from your bones while you beg and scream, or it turns you into one of its own kind. But the Wendigo's greatest curse is that no matter how much flesh it consumes, it only grows hungrier. With every ounce of meat it takes in, it grows taller and more emaciated. Its hunger grows more insatiable with its height, until it's a towering beast with its head amongst the treetops as it roams the forest, constantly searching for its next meal. Gibson whimpered and burrowed her face into my armpit as if hearing my inner thoughts. Trying to reassure her, I stroked her fur and told her it'd be okay, although I had a feeling it wouldn't. I tried to get the fire going again, but it was a fruitless effort. Everything inside the stove was damp and wet, and scolded myself for dousing the fire with so much water. Still, I kept at it, knowing we might be stuck here for a while. Pretty soon the wind was howling and blowing outside, and the snow was piling up in front of the door. I made a point of opening it every so often to clear the snow from the steps, knowing that I would need firewood, taking weary glances off into the forest across the lake as I did so. Finally, I got the fire started, a low guttering flame in the stove, which wanted to go out all the time. Everything was damp, but I kept feeding it fresh kindling, nursing it, until it was able to keep going by itself. Hours passed as we waited to either run out of firewood or be attacked by the creature. We were running low on kindling and the sun was beginning to set. My stomach rumbled with hunger when I felt something strange. The ground suddenly shook beneath my feet, and I heard Gibson whining from beside me. "What is it, girl?" I asked, my voice catching in my throat as I realized the answer. It was the creature. It was back. The dining room table began to rattle and bounce up and down as whatever was outside got closer, and I imagined the creature lifting the roof off a cabin like a top on a dish in a fancy restaurant, picking me up and eating me whole like a wriggling shrimp. A second later, there was a sound at the front door, metal being ripped and sheared as I realized the creature was making its way in. The screen door landed on the ground with a crash, and that the wooden door was being torn from its hinges an instant later. Cold air rushed inside as Gibson began to let out shrill, panicked barks of terror. I heard the thing tearing apart the front entrance, easily ripping apart the wood and making the doorway larger so that it could come inside. I tipped over the dining room table to use as a barricade. I picked up a chair, the only weapon I could find nearby, thinking I could throw it at the thing's face to defend us, when I heard a strange noise from the front. It was a car horn honking. Someone had come to save me. I heard a loud ding and pulled out my phone and saw the green check mark beside my group chat, indicating that at some point it had gone through, at some brief moment when there'd been a gap in the clouds. Reading the new messages brought a hopeful smile across my face. "Matt, you just had to skip town a day early and go ice fishing, didn't you?" "What the hell is that thing?" Ted was yelling from outside. "I don't know, but it's trying to get inside. Jay, are you there?" I shouted back that I was. There was a loud screech from outside, which I realized had come from the monster. They'd actually wounded it somehow. I ran to the front door with Gibson and looked out, seeing the creature for the first time. It stood with its back to us, its head among the treetops, even taller than it appeared at first. My friends had caught it off guard, but now it was fully aware of them, and it was going after them. The Wendigo was distracted by something in front of the cottage, and I realized that one of my friends had gotten out of the car and they were using themselves as bait so that I could flee the cottage safely. They had driven across the ice with their lighter vehicle, just as I had hoped to do. I guessed that they'd run into trouble moving the body of the giant bear which blocked the road. "Jay!" Ted screamed out the window, driving the car in a circle on the ice, as if too terrified to stay still. I raced over to the car, slipping and sliding on the ice. It was Matt who was distracting the Wendigo, I realized, and I called for him to get away from the thing. It was too large, too fast. He didn't know what he was dealing with, but that was Matt. He was always act first and think later kind of guy. Not only that, but he often put himself in harm's way for his friends. He turned to look at me and gave a thumbs up, his attention diverted from the creature for a split second. As Gibson and I got into the car, we heard his scream. I looked up to see the Wendigo, close the distance in an instant, and was picking him up like an insect, turning him over and beginning to bite him. As Matt screamed for help, the creature peeled off his skin, exposed his skull as it ate his face. The calls for help turned to bubbling gurgles and wet, choking sounds, and I nearly got out of the car to run after him, but Ted grabbed my wrist and pulled me back inside. "You can't save him," he said with wet-rimmed eyes, and eventually I relented. We raced our way across the icy lake, making a path through the blizzard, cutting a swath off the fresh-fallen snow on our way back to mainland. For a while, we debated what to do. Should we call the police? Our friend had just died, after all, but we knew that if we did, we'd be considered suspects. And with no other reasonable explanation, they'd pin his death on us. They'd say we'd killed him. There were no boxes they could check on an official police report citing a Wendigo attack. So, since such things didn't exist, being myths and legends, we'd be their only suspect. As it turned out, we didn't have to worry about it, though. A message popped up from Matt on the group chat just a few minutes after we got home, and I had to tell myself that it wasn't all just a nightmare, a hallucination from the cold and lack of sleep and food. But Ted and Greg both told me I hadn't imagined it. What we saw was real, as much as I wish it wasn't. The three of us read the message on the group chat again and again. My heart was beating fast, and a sick knot was growing in my stomach, bile rising in my throat that I could taste inside my mouth. "Hey guys, you really missed out on a feast. Ice fishing is just as much fun in a blizzard, if not more so. Let's reschedule the trip for next week, okay? I'll be waiting for you here." As much as we didn't want to go, we've resolved that we have to. We can't leave Matt like that. We have to help him. Next week, we're making the trip back up there, even if it kills us. I'm shaking as I write this. I've thought about calling the police, but I haven't figured out if I'm losing my mind or if my entire family has lost theirs. Maybe I'll wake up soon and this will all be a terrible nightmare. For context, I'm an only child and the only grandchild of my last living grandmother. A couple of weeks ago, while I was at work, I received a phone call from my mom informing me that my grandmother had fallen in her kitchen. Mom said that my Uncle Lou was with her and already in the ambulance. Paramedics suspected she had a fractured hip and somehow had sliced open her foot. She was sedated due to the pain, but was otherwise responsive and fine. I immediately asked if I should meet them at the hospital. My mom said, No, don't leave work. We'll update you once we know more. So, I waited. I love my grandma, but she's probably the most stubborn woman I've ever met. She has a home remedy for just about anything, and loathed seeing a doctor. So I was sure that she wouldn't be fun to deal with from the confines of a hospital bed. It doesn't help that Grandma absolutely refuses to use a walker or a cane despite her debilitating age, and won't leave the house to live in a nursing home. 6 months ago, Uncle Lou moved in with her to help out. Not that he said it out loud, but I've always suspected he did it more for free rent, though. With nothing else to do, I sat at work, distracted, and waiting for a phone call from Mom with news. The call didn't come through until long after I'd gotten home and was brushing my teeth for bed. Apparently, Grandma was awake now and doing fine. She would need surgery for the broken hip, but they were able to get the laceration on her foot stitched up and bandaged. I asked to speak to her, so Mom held the phone up to Grandma's ear, and I told her that I loved her and I'd come see her once she was discharged. The hospital only allowed 2 visitors, and Mom and Uncle Lou refused to leave her side. "Hi, honey," Grandma said through the receiver. "I'm okay, but they won't let me leave." My mom's voice in the background exasperatedly explained that she needed surgery. "So they tell me. I'm fine, Anna. Come see me when I get home and we can play cards." I smiled, promising to visit, and said goodbye. She was discharged the following week and sent home. The hip replacement was successful, but she developed a nasty infection on her foot. Between the 2 ailments, Grandma was confined to her bed. Once she was comfortable at home, Mom gave me the okay to come over, so I made some chicken and dumpling soup and sat in a chair beside her bed while Mom spoon-fed Grandma. "There you go, Mom," my mom encouraged as Grandma sipped the broth off the spoon. I could tell that Grandma was wildly out of it. I had been expecting an earful about having to use a bedpan due to the cocktail of narcotics and antibiotics, but she merely grumbled in annoyance at Mom and Lou's constant hovering. For what it was, she seemed in good spirits, if not exceptionally tired. After about 2 hours of small talk and a soup mishap, I got up to leave. Mom saw me to the door. "She'll be fine, Anna. Lou and I are taking care of everything. Don't worry." I left feeling optimistic that my grandma would be back to her old Spitfire self relatively soon. But that visit with the soup was over 2 weeks ago now. Not long after, Mom took a leave of absence from work and holed up in Grandma's house with Uncle Lou. Each time I called, Mom gave a new excuse as to why I shouldn't visit. Risk of infection, flu season, fatigue, bowel issues, you name it. At first, I accepted these excuses at face value. They seem legit, but I can't even get Mom to put Grandma on the phone anymore. I made more soup yesterday and dropped it off, but Uncle Lou met me at the door and said it wasn't a good time, but he'd make sure she got it. "And we always let her know when you come to call," he assured. I noticed that there was an intense floral and antiseptic smell coming from the doorway. "Your mom won't stop cleaning," he explained. Frustrated, I called and complained to my father on my way home, but he defended Mom like always. She's always been like that. They're extremely close, your mom and your grandma. And Lou, well, this just seems like classic Lou. You know, this is the first time they've really had to face the reality of their mother's age. They're just protective and scared to lose her. I figured he was right and hung up the phone feeling a little less unsettled. On Grandma's 89th birthday, however, I decided I wasn't going to take no for an answer. I would go over there and give her the present I had purchased for her, a new thriller by her favorite author. I arrived at the house in late afternoon and noticed all the blinds were closed. Being that it was a warm spring day, it was common for Grandma to have all the windows and drapes open, letting in both the sunlight and the fresh air. I knocked twice on the front door, but no one came. I knocked again with no answer. I tried the door, but it was locked. I paused for a moment, considering that maybe no one was home. Maybe Grandma had a follow-up with her surgeon. But both cars were in the driveway, so I knocked again, louder this time. The door opened a crack, and a foul odor filtered out, nearly choking me. "Mom?" I exclaimed, when her face appeared on the other side of the door. "What's that smell?" Seeing it was only me, she opened the door another inch. The infection's gotten worse, but we're monitoring it." "Should I call an ambulance?" I asked in a panic, pulling my cell phone out. No, Anne," she quickly reassured me. We have it handled. I stopped by and picked up refills on her antibiotics earlier, and we've been on the phone with her surgeon." Relieved, I took a deep breath, but the smell was so overpowering. "Mom, that smells ungodly. Why don't you open the windows?" We tried, but she's got so cold." Mom shrugged and didn't move. "Can I come in?" I asked, attempting to look over her shoulder into the dim house. I really didn't want to go inside due to the smell, but if Grandma wasn't doing well, I wanted to see her. "I don't think it's a good idea." "Where's Uncle Lou?" "Upstairs in his room." Her voice was reassuring, but the smell turned me aside. Surely a smell like that could only mean bad things. I pushed the door open and Mom protested. Just come back another day when she's feeling better. I promised you that Lou and I have this under control." In the kitchen, the odor was strong, but mixed with the smell of bleach. I couldn't tell if that made it better or worse. "At least let me see her and give her birthday present." Mom looked down to see the wrapped gift in her hand. "Of course," she said. "Gosh, I'm sorry. I've been so preoccupied. I'm sure she'll love it." At that moment, Uncle Lou came trotting down the stairs and smiled at me. "Anna, Mom will be so happy you're here." I looked at my mother incredulously. She was staring at her feet. What was going on? Uncle Lou continued down the hall, and I could hear him as he opened the door to Grandma's bedroom. "Mom, you have a visitor for your birthday." The smell of the house was searing my nostrils, but I wasn't going to let Grandma know I was repulsed by it. Mom led me down the hall to Grandma's bedroom, instructing me along the way to put on a brave face. I plastered on a smile as I turned the corner into the room. Grandma was sitting up in bed, and Uncle Lou had taken a seat on the mattress beside her. His body obscured most of the view, but I could see her feet were stuck out from under the quilt. The toes on her right foot were black with crumbling toenails and festering sores. The sheets under her heels were stained yellow from dried pus. Lou was prattling on to her, but Grandma wasn't responding. "Isn't it nice for Anna to come and see you on your birthday, Mom? Goodness knows you've been through a lot this month. She got you a present." He turned expectantly to me, his profile just enough to reveal Grandma's form where she sat up against the pillows. I'll try to explain the horror I witnessed, but I know that words will never do it justice. My stomach flipped and I froze. Grandma's dull, lifeless eyes stared straight ahead at the wall, unblinking and glazed over. Her eyelids were crusty and her jaw hung widely agape with sagging lips, revealing a gray fuzz that had begun to coat her tongue. Uncle Lou patted her leg while Mom hastily pulled the quilt back up over her feet. I barely heard as Lou exclaimed how cold she'd been from the infection. He picked up a tissue from the box on the nightstand and began dabbing at the corners of her mouth. "She doesn't talk much due to heavy sedation," he explained. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the pallid gray skin on Grandma's face and how it was starting to sag in ways that had nothing to do with her age. Flies buzzed overhead, and and Mom picked up the fly swatter and began swatting them away. "Goddamn flies," she mumbled. "They won't leave her alone." One of the flies circled Grandma's face and landed in her open maw. Uncle Lou merely shooed it away. "She's been sleeping sitting up like this for the past week or so," Mom explained, patting Grandma's now covered feet. "The pain is just too much for her to lay down. We tried, but her muscles spasm and she can't move. My knees were shaking and I could all but back out of the room, reaching for and pressing myself against the opposite wall. Vomit crept up the back of my throat. "It's okay, Anna," Uncle Lou said from inside the room. "I know it's hard to see her in such a state, but that's why your mom and I are taking care of her. We agreed we wouldn't let her go back to the hospital. They've already messed up so much of her care. You saw her foot and what the doctors did to it." "How a hospital could let gangrene go unnoticed is beyond me," Mom agreed. "We've been sponge bathing her regularly, airing her feet and changing her bandages. It seemed to be helping, right, Mom?" she asked, squeezing Grandma's ankle. I tried to put my head between my knees, but the smell was so overpowering. Mom stepped out in the hallway and touched my shoulder. "Oh, Anna, I'm sorry. This is why I didn't want you to come over. The gangrene smell is hard to tolerate. I didn't want you to have to see her like this." Not knowing what else to do, I pulled her into the kitchen and said in the most steady voice I could manage, "Mom, why didn't you tell me that Grandma had passed?" Mom's face didn't change. She just looked at me. "What are you talking about, Ann? She's right there. You saw her." "Yeah, I did see her," I agreed, pointing at the bedroom door where the smell was so strong I had nearly passed out. "But Grandma's dead, Mom. You know that, right? She has very obviously passed away." Mom's eyebrows narrowed and she pursed her lips. "Listen, Ann, I get that it's hard for you. Hell, it's hard for all of us, but if you're saying this just to hurt me, it's not going to work. Stop being a brat. Your father is on his way over with a birthday cake." The room began to spin, and I needed to get out of that house immediately. I tossed the present on the kitchen table and grabbed my bag, fleeing out of the kitchen door and into the car where I took a deep breath of fresh air. I could see Mom at the large bay window looking out at me. She looked angry and upset, but I quickly turned and walked away. I pounded the steering wheel, yelling obscenities. Other than an open casket funeral, I had never seen a dead body before, let alone one that had so clearly been dead for weeks. But Grandma was undoubtedly dead, and my mother and uncle were staying in that house with her corpse, washing it and feeding it and talking to it like nothing had changed. I threw open the car door and vomited all over Grandma's neglected shrubs. By the time the dry heaves kicked in, Dad's car pulled up in the driveway. "Hey, sweetheart," he said as he opened the car door, seeing me kneeling in the grass. "Are you all right? Your mom called and told me you were quite upset." "Dad, she's dead," I choked out at the house. "Who's dead?" he asked, his voice worried. "Grandma. Grandma's dead. Mom and Lou, they're just sitting in there with her body." "Anna, calm down. Your mom mentioned you were hysterical and talking nonsense." "Talking nonsense? What are you saying?" I choked out. "Go look, Dad. I swear you'll see. She's dead, and Mom and Lou have lost their minds." "All right," he said, holding up his arms in surrender. "Let me grab the cake, and I'll go inside and see what's going on. Just stay here, okay?" I collapsed back in the front seat of my car, blasting the AC in an attempt to flush the smell of rotten flesh out of my nose. It felt like an hour before the front door opened again, and Dad calmly walked over to the driver's side window. "Hi, Anna Bear," he said cautiously. "Did you see her, Dad? You saw her, right?" "Shh, Anna," he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Calm down. Yes, I saw her, and she's very sick, but otherwise alive. Your mom and Lou are taking good care of her." "What?" I clearly screamed. "Come inside," Dad said, going for the door handle. I quickly locked the door. Dad threw up his hands in frustration. "Just come inside, Anna. Uncle Lou is getting Grandma into her wheelchair, and we're all going to have some cake." He glanced up at the front window of the house. "Ah, see? There she is." I glanced up to see my grandmother's face at the window, her dead eyes looking blankly out the front yard. Rigor mortis had made it so her body couldn't sit in the wheelchair just right. Even from a distance and through a pane of glass, I could see death in her eyes and the shocking gape of her mouth. Her face looked even more twisted now, as if she'd taken her last breath in a tremendous amount of pain. But what made me scream in abject terror was that her cloudy pupils seemed to turn ever so slightly towards me. I threw the car into drive and sped out of the driveway, ignoring the shouts of my father and Uncle Lou as he burst out the front door. I didn't dare go home, where I was sure my father would follow. Were they right? Was she actually alive? It's not like I checked for a pulse or air in her lungs before I took off. I didn't touch her at all. Could it be me then? Was I the one having a nervous breakdown? I don't know what to do now. I'm absolutely terrified. Worst of all, when I close my eyes, all I see is my grandmother's rotting face.